Welcome, everyone. We're diving deep into First Chronicles today.
It's a fascinating book.
It is full of stories and lessons.
Yeah, and it's intriguing. It's not just a historical record.
Right.
It's like a deliberate retelling of Israel's history.
I like that.
Highlighting God's faithfulness and the importance of a relationship with him.
Yeah, it all begins with this grand genealogy in chapter 1.
Oh, yeah.
It traces the lineage from Adam all the way down to Abraham.
And his descendants.
Right. And we encounter some pretty iconic figures along the way, like Noah.
Oh, yeah, Noah, the survivor of the flood.
Exactly. And then there's Nimrod, a mighty hunter.
Who established a pretty powerful kingdom.
Yeah, these names are not just placed there randomly.
Not at all.
They establish a foundation
Connecting us back
to the earliest moments
of human history.
and showcasing the lineage of faith.
That leads to the people of Israel.
It's like we're tracing the roots of a family tree, seeing how each generation builds upon the one before it. And there's one name that really jumps out at me, Peleg.
Peleg, yeah.
His name means division.
And his lifetime coincided with the division of the earth.
It's just a powerful example of how names held deep significance in the biblical world.
Absolutely.
Peleg's name wasn't just a label.
Right.
It pointed to a pivotal event in human history.
A time of separation and scattering.
It's fascinating how even a single name can hold so much weight, so much historical and spiritual significance.
Absolutely.
And as we move into chapters 2 and 4, we delve deeper into the genealogy of Judah,
The tribe from which David will descend.
the future king of Israel.
This section is packed with stories that highlight the triumphs and struggles of David's ancestors.
And one story that really stands out is the story of Jabez,
Jabez?
a man whose very name meant sorrow.
Wow.
But Jabez wasn't content to let his name define his destiny.
He wasn't.
He prayed a bold prayer
Asking God to bless him.
and expand his territory.
His prayer wasn't just about material possessions or physical space.
Right.
It was a cry for God's favor, a desire to experience the fullness of God's blessing in every aspect of his life.
And the amazing thing is, God answered his prayer.
He did.
Jabez's story is a testament to the power of prayer and the boundless love and generosity of God.
It is.
It teaches us that even when we face hardship or feel limited, we can always turn to God with bold requests, trusting that He hears us and desires to bless us.
Such an encouraging message, isn't it?
It is.
It reminds us that no matter what circumstances we find ourselves in, God is always there, ready to listen to our prayers and to work in our lives in miraculous ways.
It's like Jabez's prayer becomes a model for us,
Oh, yeah.
showing us how to approach God with humility and confidence, trusting in His goodness and His power to transform our lives.
Exactly. And as we continue our exploration of First Chronicles, we move on to the tribe of Levi in chapter 6.
The Levites,
They held a special place in Israelite society.
they were set apart for service in the tabernacle,
And later in the temple.
acting as intermediaries between God and the people.
It's interesting how the Levites were chosen not for their military strength or political prowess, but for their dedication to spiritual matters.
They remind us that true leadership often involves serving others and facilitating their connection with God.
And within the tribe of Levi, we encounter the lineage of Aaron, the first high priest of Israel.
The high priest,
He held a sacred role, offering sacrifices on behalf of the people.
and entering the Holy of Holies.
The most sacred space in the tabernacle once a year on the Day of Atonement.
It's amazing to think about the weight of responsibility that Aaron and his descendants carried,
They were entrusted with maintaining the purity of worship.
and ensuring that the people could approach God with reverence and humility.
Their role highlights the importance of ritual and tradition in maintaining a vibrant spiritual life.
It also reminds us of the need for individuals who are dedicated to upholding the sacred.
And facilitating our connection with the divine.
Speaking of connecting with the divine, we can't forget the role of music in worship.
Oh, yeah.
David himself, even before he became king, established musical worship in the house of the Lord.
He understood the power of music to express our praise and adoration for God.
That's a beautiful example of how David, even in his youth, recognized the importance of creativity and artistic expression in our relationship with God.
Absolutely.
Music transcends language and speaks directly to the heart, allowing us to connect with God on a deeper level.
So from the grand sweep of history and the genealogies to the specific roles and responsibilities of the Levites, we're already seeing some profound themes emerge.
The faithfulness of God,
The importance of prayer,
the power of leadership through service,
and the role of tradition and creativity in our spiritual life,
and these themes will continue to unfold as we delve into the narrative portion of First Chronicles.
focusing on the reign of David.
A king after God's own heart.
But before we jump into the exciting world of David's kingship, let's pause for a moment and reflect on what we've learned so far. What stands out to you?
For me, it's the reminder that faith is a journey that spans generations.
We're all connected to a long line of believers who have gone before us.
And their stories can inspire and guide us on our own paths.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
We're not alone on this journey. We're surrounded by a cloud of witnesses.
And their stories can give us strength and courage.
As we seek to live lives that are pleasing to God.
That's right. So we've been exploring like the foundational elements of First Chronicles.
Right.
And now we're ready to witness the rise of David.
A pivotal figure in Israel's history.
Exactly. It's fascinating to see how First Chronicles presents David as this model of leadership.
Highlighting both his military accomplishments
And his unwavering faith in God.
We first encounter David as a young shepherd.
Chosen by God to replace King Saul.
And his rise to power begins with a bold move. The conquest of Jerusalem.
A seemingly impregnable city held by the Jebusites.
The Jebusites were a Canaanite tribe.
Who had control of Jerusalem for centuries.
And their stronghold on this strategic location
posed a significant challenge to David's aspirations of uniting the tribes of Israel.
But David, trusting in God's promise, successfully captures the city.
And establishes it as his capital.
Laying the groundwork for a unified kingdom.
David's conquest of Jerusalem wasn't just a military victory. It was a symbolic act.
Signifying the establishment of a central place of worship for all the tribes of Israel.
Exactly.
It's almost like David was creating a physical representation of the spiritual unity he desired for his people.
A place where they could come together to worship the one true God.
And speaking of unity, David's reign is marked by the formation of a loyal and courageous band of warriors.
Known as his mighty men.
These men were renowned for their extraordinary feats of strength and valor.
Standing by David's side through thick and thin.
Their stories are legendary. We hear about Benaiah, who killed a lion in a pit on a snowy day.
And Eleazar,
who single-handedly fought off the Philistines, defending a field of barley.
It's like something straight out of an action movie.
It is.
But their courage wasn't just brute force.
Right.
It stemmed from their loyalty to David and their unwavering faith in God.
They understood that true strength comes from aligning oneself with God's purposes.
Their stories inspire us to be courageous in our own lives.
Not necessarily in a physical sense.
But in standing up for what we believe in.
Even when it's difficult.
Exactly. And as David's power and influence grow, so does his desire to honor God.
He yearns to build a temple, a permanent dwelling place for the Ark of the Covenant.
The Ark, for our listeners who may not know, was a sacred chest that represented God's presence among his people.
It had been kept in a tent-like structure called the tabernacle. But David envisions something more grand, more fitting for a king who rules by God's grace.
But God, through the prophet Nathan, tells David that he won't be the one to build the temple.
Instead, the honor will fall to his son Solomon.
You can imagine how David might have felt upon hearing this news.
He'd poured his heart into this dream, and now it seems to be slipping away.
But David's response is remarkable. He doesn't question God's plan or become bitter.
Instead, he offers a prayer of gratitude, acknowledging God's sovereignty and expressing his unwavering trust in his promises.
David's humility is truly inspiring.
He recognizes that, ultimately, it's not about his own glory or ambition,
but about fulfilling God's will.
And in a beautiful twist, God promises David that he will build him a house.
Not a physical structure,
but a dynasty, a lineage that will endure forever.
This promise points forward to the coming of Jesus, the ultimate descendant of David who will establish an eternal kingdom.
So even though David's immediate desire is not fulfilled,
God offers him something even greater.
A promise that extends far beyond his earthly reign.
And amidst these grand plans and prophetic pronouncements, we encounter a story that highlights both the joy and the danger of encountering the sacred.
The story of David bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem.
Imagine the scene. A grand procession, music filling the air, people dancing and rejoicing as the Ark, symbol of God's presence, is finally brought to the city of David.
It's a moment of pure celebration.
And spiritual ecstasy.
But amidst the revelry, tragedy strikes Uzzah. One of the men transporting the Ark reaches out to steady it, and he's struck dead on the spot.
It's a sudden, shocking event that casts a shadow over the celebration.
And it raises some important questions about the nature of holiness and the importance of reverence.
The Ark was considered so holy that touching it was strictly forbidden.
Uzzah's actions, though well-intentioned, violated this sacred boundary,
resulting in a tragic consequence.
It's a sobering reminder that our approach to God must always be marked by humility and respect.
We can't treat the sacred casually or take his presence for granted.
It's a balance, isn't it?
We're called to draw near to God with joy and confidence.
But also with a deep awareness of his holiness and our own human limitations.
So we've seen David the warrior, David the visionary,
And now David the worshiper.
confronted with the awesome power of God's presence, but his story doesn't end there.
Indeed, there's much more to explore as we continue our deep dive,
We'll encounter moments of triumph and moments of failure,
revealing the complexities of David's character.
and the profound lessons we can learn from his life.
And I can't wait to uncover those lessons and see how they can apply to our own lives today. So stay tuned as we delve deeper into the heart of David's story.
Uncovering the wisdom and guidance that 1 Chronicles offers for those seeking to live lives of faith and purpose.
We've journeyed through genealogies, witnessed the rise of David, and explored the complexities of his leadership.
And now we arrive at a pivotal moment
Right.
that reveals the depth of David's heart.
His response to a devastating plague that sweeps through Israel.
It's a somber turn of events,
It is.
a consequence of David's decision to number the people of Israel.
An act that, as we discussed earlier, was seen as a challenge to God's authority.
It's hard to imagine the weight of guilt and sorrow.
That David must have felt as he witnessed the devastating effects of his actions.
Thousands of his people perish because of his pride and disobedience.
But it's in these moments of profound brokenness.
That we see the true measure of a person's character.
And David's response is a testament to his humility.
And his unwavering faith.
He doesn't try to justify his actions or shift the blame.
No.
Instead, he acknowledges his sin, repents before God.
And accepts the consequences of his choices.
In 1 Chronicles 21:8,
We hear David's heartfelt plea to God.
he says, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. Now, I beg you, take away the guilt of your servant. I have done a very foolish thing.
It's a raw, honest prayer.
Stripped of all pretense.
David doesn't try to bargain with God or make excuses,
He simply throws himself on God's mercy.
recognizing his own need for forgiveness,
And God, in his infinite compassion, hears David's prayer.
and offers him a way forward
He instructs David through the prophet Gad.
to build an altar on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite.
Now, a threshing floor, for those who might not be familiar,
It was a flat, open area.
used for separating grain from the chaff,
It was a place of hard work.
but also a place of provision where the fruits of the harvest were gathered and prepared.
It's symbolic, isn't it?
This place of provision
This place where grain is transformed into food,
becomes the site where David will offer a sacrifice of atonement.
seeking reconciliation with God,
And what's even more remarkable is that Ornan, a Jebusite,
a foreigner.
offers to give David the threshing floor for free, along with the oxen for the sacrifice and the wood for the altar,
He's deeply moved by David's repentance.
and wants to show his support,
It's a beautiful gesture of generosity and compassion.
highlighting the power of forgiveness to bridge divides and bring people together.
But David, in a moment that reveals the depth of his integrity,
Refuses to accept the gift,
he insists on paying the full price.
declaring, I will not sacrifice to the Lord my God burnt offerings that cost me nothing.
David understood that true sacrifice involves giving something of value.
Something that cost us personally.
He wouldn't offer to God something that was given to him freely.
It had to be a genuine expression of his own devotion and willingness to make amends.
His actions speak volumes about his character.
He's not just going through the motions of repentance
He's demonstrating a genuine desire to honor God.
and to make things right.
And this act of purchasing the threshing floor has profound implications for the future of Israel.
It's on this very spot that David's son, Solomon, will eventually build the magnificent temple.
A permanent dwelling place for the Ark of the Covenant.
So this seemingly small transaction
This act of sacrificial giving,
becomes a pivotal moment in Israel's history,
laying the foundation
both literally and figuratively.
for a glorious future.
It's a beautiful example of how God can use even our mistakes and our moments of brokenness to accomplish his purposes,
David's sin leads to repentance,
which leads to sacrifice,
which ultimately paves the way for the building of the temple.
a symbol of God's presence among his people.
As we wrap up our deep dive into 1 Chronicles, we're left with a profound sense of the interconnectedness of our lives.
And the ways in which God is constantly at work weaving together a tapestry of redemption and hope,
We've encountered stories of faith and failure, of leadership and humility.
of obedience and forgiveness,
And through it all, we've seen how God remains faithful to his promises.
guiding his people towards a future filled with purpose and blessing.
So as you continue to reflect on the stories of David, the kings, and the people of Israel,
Remember that their journey is a reflection of our own.
We're all on a quest for meaning and purpose.
striving to live lives that are pleasing to God.
And may the lessons we've gleaned from First Chronicles inspire us to approach God with humility and boldness,
Lead with integrity and compassion.
and to trust in his unwavering love and faithfulness no matter what challenges we may face.